Welcome back to my watery grave, where we examine the truly horrific and mysterious stories from across the globe at the fine midnight hour. I sail my lightship around the world in search of the paranormal in order to shine a light on it. These things usually hide in the shadows and live off fear. Join me once again as we take on yet another dark tale. It's your standard night at sea here. Crashing waves and thunder, salty sea spray peppering the windows. Gotta love the ocean. It bows to no one and takes no prisoners. My current coordinates are 29.2101 degrees north and 68.4138 degrees west, and I'm only heading further east. I need to get away from where I was. My last endeavor will haunt me. Most do, but this one will be in a darker corner of my memory that I hope one day to forget. I fear this horror was my doing. Although unintentional, I believe I personally set this tragedy into motion. I felt that a lot recently. Anyway, the last expedition led me to a small town in Louisiana, USA. I'd gotten word of strange disappearances and multiple instances of mutilations. You know, the usual stuff. But this one seemed different. The town wasn't seeking help from the local authorities or even the national ones. I had heard about it by being contacted by a lady in the town for hell's sake. They seemed to just try and bury it and hide it, and that is what first intrigued me. Why would this group of people try to hide these crimes? I know now why, for their secrecy wasn't sinister in its nature. It was just so horrendous that no one dare speak of it. I went to investigate. Arriving in Louisiana and docking the Lantern in Vermilion Bay, I started to travel northwest to the middle of nowhere. It was several miles outside Lyons Point, at a crossroads named after two fish. This hidden little town, not even being big enough to be named on most maps, has seen 5 children ranging from 6 to 13 die in 2 weeks, and 3 more young adults go missing during the same time. As I got closer to the town, it was clear they didn't see many visitors. Hell, the only road, if you could even call it that led to it seemed more like someone's driveway, slowly twisting into the dense trees and swamp. An old dirt parking lot at the entrance of the town was where I had to park. The town didn't even have roads that led through it, only walking paths that led to the center of the town and spread it out to the houses, like gnarly vines slowly twisting towards its end goal. When I arrived in the actual town, I saw there was no visible businesses of any kind. No inns, no stores, not even a gas station. This place seemed deserted, completely barren, but looks can be deceiving, as I knew I wasn't alone. The feeling of eyes on me were prevalent and seemed to be originating from every direction, emanating from inside the trees itself. Felt uncomfortable from the second I got out of the car. As I reached the town center, I met the woman that contacted me. She was the mother of the 2 youngest children killed and dismembered by some unseen and unknown force. She was devastated, and rightly so. She reached out to me after learning that there were no investigation of any kind into the deaths and disappearances. She led me to her house, really only a small wooden shack with 3 rooms, and not one of them even with stable electricity or running water. She explained more in depth what had happened during the past few weeks. First, it started out with the strange noises radiating from deep inside the marsh. The noises were human in nature, but that didn't make it better knowing what was making those horrible sounds. The noise was that of the first victim, age 9, being ripped into pieces while still alive. The noise fit the act perfectly, of nothing but pure pain and anguish. The noise wasn't long-lasting, as anyone in the situation of what that poor 9-year-old endured would have died soon after the second limb was removed. The lady was already trembling, remembering those unholy noises. She explained that the next morning the town held a meeting in the town hall to investigate where this noise came from together. The people moved through the woods in a large circle, centered at the meeting house and moving their way out, searching for any signs of what could have screamed out in such an awful manner. They didn't find quite what they had expected. The first piece found was the child's left arm. Next was the right leg, and then the left leg and right arm. The final piece found was the head. Disturbingly, the torso was never found, and the body parts seemed to have been placed where they were found intentionally, as they were spread out in the woods outside of town to form a 5-pointed star. The head directly north of city center, left arm not as far north but much more westerly. In line with the left arm was the right arm on the east side of town, and I can assume you can picture where the legs were. The lady said that even though the torso was gone, everyone knew that it was supposed to be represented by the town hall. I asked her why she thought someone would do this, and she couldn't answer. She moved on to the next case of the mutilated kids, struggling more and more as she went on. It took several hours for her to describe them all. The next kid was her youngest, having all of his internal organs removed, and then being stitched back up and positioned, sitting on the steps of the town hall, as if nothing had happened. Third was the 13-year-old, who was probably the tamest of all the deaths, with her throat and wrists being cut, and she was hung upside down in a tree inside the town center. All of her blood was drained out of her, and the most peculiar part of her death was that the ground below her was completely dry. One would imagine a gallon of blood dumped in one spot would saturate the ground at least somewhat, even if it was left overnight to dry. But nothing dries in this humid hell. Not the tears from the woman describing the children being tortured, not the sweat on my back, and certainly not the blood that saturated the fourth kid's clothes. He was her other son that was murdered. He was 7 and only a year older than his brother. By this point, the children of the town refused to leave their houses. No one knew who was going to be next, but they tried their hardest to keep it from being them. But to the dismay of the mom weeping in front of me, this 7-year-old boy's luck ran out. He had all the bones removed from his body except for his skull, creating a small puddle of flesh and horror with the petrified expression of pain of a young boy's face resting on top. As you may have assumed too, it lay near the town hall. The 5th child was 10. She had her eyes, tongue, ears, nose, and fingers missing. The skull had also been crushed, almost as if someone used a cross-peen hammer with the skull as an anvil. Each death was preceded by horrendous screams, waking the town, time and time again, to the horrors of what was happening around them. It was very late in the night by the time she had finished describing the 5 murders, taking time to recompose herself and offer me a meal in between. I declined the meal as I had no stomach for food by that point. She offered me a place to stay, and that she suggests not trying to leave at night, because this place has a knack for changing. And not even with the recent murders, people who try to leave the town always seem to get lost, and are never really seen again. I asked her if that's what happened with the 3 missing adults. She got quiet after that. She didn't think that they had run away or got lost. They had been living in this town their whole lives, and they liked it here. It was all 3 males, they were the same age, and they were best friends since childhood. They'd all gone missing before the kids were murdered, and she suggested 2 choices of what had happened to them. She was worried that the same thing that had been murdering these kids got to them first, just they were never found, if there was anything left of them to find. I suggested the idea that maybe the 3 kids were behind the murders. She only responded that that was the second option. We sat in silence for a while after. Minutes and possibly even an hour went by as we sat thinking about these heinous acts and what they could possibly mean, or what could be capable of doing this. She excused herself and she went to bed. I slept on the couch. I didn't feel comfortable sleeping in the room of the deceased. I woke early the next morning as light from the sun penetrated through the cracks of the dilapidated shack's wood walls. It was honestly beautiful. The sight of fresh morning rays glistening off the dust and other particles in the air. My feeling quickly faded as I heard the slight sob from the poor lady in the room over. She had had everything important to her taken away, and she had asked me to find out why. Why did 5 kids have to die in such grandiose fashion? Why this town? What did this accomplish, and was it finished? I let myself out, silently trying not to disturb her. I walked straight towards town center. All of the deaths could be connected to the town hall in some way, so that seemed like the best place to start. I saw several other people close to their homes staring at me as I made my way. They all seemed like they had been through hell, and in a way they have. Their gazes were not that of friendship, though. It was that of anger and confusion. They don't get a lot of outsiders, and I can only imagine their wariness to accept anyone new, especially what they have gone through. Thought it best not to stop and converse with them. Besides, I don't think I want to listen to any more people describe the atrocities inflicted on this poor community. After a couple of minutes, I was walking up to the steps of the town center. The door was locked, but that wasn't going to stop me. I looked around and saw some of the townspeople have started to walk closer to the hall. I knew where this was going, and I knew it wasn't going to be fun. Not wanting to be seen breaking into the town hall, I turned and made my way down the steps again. The mob of people were quickly approaching. I was confronted by the group of people soon after getting to the bottom of the small flight of stairs. They were already quite unnerved without me saying a word. They demanded to know what I was doing here, and I was told to leave at once. The pain in their voices, I'll never forget it. I tried to say that I was invited by one of them to find why the bad things had happened, but they weren't having any of it. I decided best to leave for now and come back later when most people were too frightened to go out. I walked back to my rental car and grabbed my flashlight and a backpack out of the trunk. The supplies I needed I did not know, but one can never be too careful. Night fell over the small town, and I walked in, making sure to stay hidden from sight. I can see why these people are so suspicious and afraid. The dense trees practically made it invisible for any moonlight or city light to reach the town. The lack of constant electricity didn't help either. I walked up to the town hall, tried the door again, and it was still locked. I don't know if I really expected anything different, but the door wasn't too much trouble to break open. The whole town was completely run down anyway, and the town hall wasn't any different. I slid inside, careful to be as quiet and slow as possible. It was black inside. It was black outside. And as uneasy as I felt in the open woods, the feeling was much worse in here. I turned on my flashlight, and it illuminated the whole building. There were chairs and a stage and podium, your standard old church-turned-meeting house. I searched for any clues or signs of evil. It seemed fine for the most part, nothing out of the ordinary. The chairs were your typical folding chairs, and the podium didn't have any secrets inside of it. There wasn't any second story or crawl spaces that could be seen. After searching for a while and finding nothing, I sat on one of the chairs. The creaking of the metal was the only sound of life for hours. I needed to find something. I usually don't feel as connected to cases, but I felt I needed some answers for that poor woman. How could I come up with nothing? After several minutes of sitting and scanning the room, I decided that the non-destructive approach wasn't the way to go. I had already broke the door open, and this place is in shambles anyway. I couldn't do nearly the amount of damage weather had over time. I walked to the stage and knocked on the panels, trying to find something. Anything hidden would help. Most of the panels were solid, but when I got to the end, the final panel was loose. Bingo. I kicked through the panel and found a small crawl space behind it. It wasn't long, but too long for my taste. At the end of the small tunnel, it led to a drop-off, and the drop-off glowed ever so slightly. As I made my way to the hole, a small room was below. It was about a 15-foot drop to the floor, and it wasn't very bright in there. The little light that did come off was from candles suspended from the ceiling. Now, I'd been in the game long enough to know that a small dark room with candles in them usually do not lead to good things. Nevertheless, I dropped down with a splash. My feet were in a couple inches of liquid, and it was much too dark to see what the liquid was. But I had a feeling I knew exactly what it was. I looked down to see what my surroundings were. They were in a small room with very little in it besides the liquid and candles. The walls were made from hastily carved rock, like a one-room catacomb. On one of the walls I saw a darker void, seeming to suggest that there is another room besides this. I began my walk to the void, sloshing ever so slightly with each step. I took another step and heard a crunch, and startled I stepped back. I slowly bent down and picked up whatever I had stepped on, and to my horror I pulled what looked to be a small femur cracked in half. I knew then for sure that I was in the room of the missing body parts of the children. I turned on my flashlight to get a better look, and the sight will be one that haunts me for the rest of my life. The missing torso half submerged in a pool of blood, intestines snaking out around the numerous body parts, or what was left of them. I decided I needn't spend any more time in that fucking room, so I left towards the makeshift doorway. There was a step up to the door, as if it was designed to hold the blood in the room. It was a small inclined hallway that led up to the second room that was slightly smaller than the one before it. My flashlight illuminated the way, but somehow it seemed the darkness was able to suppress most of its power. I made my way up the ramp, not knowing where it will lead, and not really too excited to find out either. I guess it couldn't be much worse than the other room I was just in. The hallway seemed to extend further than previously seemed. I continued on, blackness enveloping every step. I walked into the other room. The ceiling was much lower, and I couldn't stand up entirely. Ducking slightly while entering, I reached the middle of a small rectangular room, and I could feel another presence in there. I spun around, shining my light against the entrance wallway, and I saw them. 3 men sat with their backs up against the wall, breathing slowly, and it seemed to be quite painful for them. In a normal situation, this would have been a very bad place to be in, with 3 men against 1, especially when they had me by surprise. But they were in no shape to fight, and I knew they meant no harm. They looked emaciated and in extreme anguish. They were practically lifeless, nothing but skin attached to bones. Slow breath that ached its way out was dry, and smelled worse than the room prior. Their eyes were completely blacked out. Even as I stand in front of them, they didn't acknowledge my presence. Maybe they didn't have the energy to do so. I slowly approached one, ready to block any attack if they could even move their limbs. I leaned close to find any wounds or anything more out of place than what was already. As I got within inches of one, his breathing changed. It was as labored and painful as normal, but it sounded as if he was trying to mumble. It took several attempts to make out completely what he was saying. Kill me. It's inside us. It's evil. Kill me. I sat back. Poor man began his heavy breathing again. I knew what had to be done, but I held out for a few minutes. I wanted to know what was inside them. I looked around the room a bit more and saw what I was afraid I would encounter. When what was left of that man said it's evil, I didn't want to believe it, but somehow I knew exactly what he was talking about. And that symbol I saw on that far wall cemented it as being what I'd hoped to never deal with again. I took out my knife and didn't hesitate to puncture each of the husks in the heart. There was no blood that ran out. The only thing that came out was a viscous black sludge, oozing slowly out of the wound. I waited for a few minutes until the belabored breaths ceased forever. After a minute of deafening silence, I took out a safety flare and a small bottle of water. After a minute of deafening silence, I took out a safety flare and a small water bottle full of gas from my backpack. I wasn't going to use the flare to signal for help or for anyone to find me. I don't think anyone would see it anyway, but I was very aware of what would take notice of the flare. That damn evil entity would know me. It would see me, and it's gonna come back later like it always does. It draws me in because it knows I'll do whatever I can to stop it. It is a fruitless attempt because I know I can't kill it, but I will stop its spread for now. I set the flare and bottle down, looked up and started to dig. The ceiling above me was mainly just clay and dirt. It wasn't hard to get through, I just hoped that I could actually get out that way. 8 minutes passed and it was purely wet dirt falling down into this tomb. Only a few minutes later, and I could start to break through to the top surface. It was covered in moss and vines, and I made a small hole big enough for only me to climb out of. I looked around and saw that I was on the outskirts of town. Only a handful or so of trees deep, but deep enough to be hidden from sight from the houses. I crawled back down into the small hellhole, grabbed the 2 tools I needed, and continued down. Down that hallway went. Arriving at the first room, I was hesitant to step back into it. What pure evil lies in that blood-covered room? I looked at the mangled torso and imagined what else lies underneath the glistening red. Won't matter in a few minutes. I unscrewed the bottle and began to pour. What I was doing seemed wrong. Destroying the final remnants of these kids? Was it really my place to take away the final pieces of something or someone when I had never had any part in its life? I have to bury those thoughts. No mother would want to see what had become of their child. I lit the flare and watched as the dim, dark room flooded with red. I tossed the flare and started to get out of there as fast as I could, only stopping to make sure the blood pool was still ablaze. The smell of burning blood and flesh filled my nose. That's the smell of evil. It's putrid and makes you want to die. Light from the fire fills the second room with an eerie glow. The last thing I did before crawling up to the surface was destroy that fucking symbol. I sat at the entrance of the hole for a few minutes. It was still dark out, but you could start to hear birds chirping. Funny. That was the first time I'd heard birds chirping since arriving in this town, and I hope it's not the last. I covered up the hole with more dirt and vines. No one needed to find that place. I started towards the house of the woman. The hardest part was going to be telling her it's over. It won't bring those kids back. It won't make her forget what she had seen and what she had lost. Slowly opened the door to her shack. She was sitting on the couch waiting for me. She looks over and says I look like hell, and I can't really say she looks any better, but I just sit down without a word. I told her it's over. There won't be any more murders. She asked why and who did it, and what the point was. I don't have any answers that would stop her pain. And so I lied. I told her I killed the person that killed everyone. I told her that the 3 young men that went missing were the first victims. I found their bodies along with another man. I told her I got the drop on him, and he admitted everything. Said he did it for the thrill. Honestly, I wish that were true. I wish it was as easy as some horrible, deranged man. She didn't seem to believe me at first, but maybe she just saw the pain in my eyes pleading for her to accept it. Maybe she just needed something to believe. She said, "So that's it then, it's done?" I nodded slowly. She got up from the couch and thanked me, and she was tired and she was gonna go to bed. I was welcome to spend the rest of the night and sleep, but after that I should probably leave. I agreed and thanked her for her hospitality. We both retired. When I woke that morning, it was silent. Her quiet sobs weren't there, and even the birds were quiet. It's never a good sign. I left without a word, telling myself that she was just sleeping late. I knew she was going to be sleeping for a long, long time. I went to the rental car. It was time I go back out to sea. I had been on land for long enough. It wasn't a good visit, but a necessary one. God, I couldn't wait to be back to sea. And here we are now, as waves rock the boat. Loud thunderclaps and the occasional seagull squawk fill the air. God, I love the sea. It's simple and it doesn't involve dead kids. Anyway, enough stories for tonight. Good night, ladies and gentlemen. Stay vigilant. There are dark forces among us.